All right, welcome back to Living Luna. And before I forget anything else, I am going to tell you about Juicy, because I finally freaking remembered why I had to bring up that meditation studio last episode.
Yes, so if you're like, the fuck is Juicy? You can go back to like minute 35 or something, and
in episode 0.
In episode 0, and Safriana will talk about a meditation studio, and I will get her off topic, and then she will spend the rest of the episode being like, why did I bring up this meditation studio?
So literally, it was probably, 3 minutes after we finished recording episode 0, I suddenly screamed Juicy from the middle of the kitchen, because that was the tie-in.
Yep.
It was because Rosema, who led the meditation studio, would look deeply into our eyes while we were doing meditative yoga, and she would say something to the effect of, "This is a juicy experience.
Wow.
You need to lean into the juiciness
wow.
of this moment." And she just would say juicy a whole lot. And she's like this little sweet, I don't know how old she is. I don't know how old she was. Gosh, this was like 10 years ago at this point. But she was probably in her late 50s, early 60s at that point. You know, graying, curly hair, looking like a yogi with the, you know, the sarongs and the beautiful, like, silk scarves, and just this peaceful little woman and just that deep eye gaze. Juicy. It was an experience.
And if you want us to make an ASMR thing where we just whisper juicy. Into the microphones, let us know and we'll make a Patreon for that.
ASMR of my wheezy laugh. That's a thing.
And saying juicy over and over again.
So today's topic is neurodiversity and neurodivergence.
Yep.
And this is a topic that's important to both of us since we identify as neurodivergent. So before we launch into really discussing this, I figured probably want to define it for the audience, because when did you even hear about this term originally?
I was looking for different sites for my internship, and I was trying to figure out what population to work with. Like, did I want to work at an inpatient place? Did I want to work with trauma survivors? Did I want to work with kids? Did I want to, all of this different stuff. And I was curious about working with autistic kids, because I remember having a really great experience working with autistic kids when I substitute taught several years ago. And I just felt like I related to them weirdly.
Wonder why.
And so I found that there weren't many places offering stuff, supports for specifically autistic kids. But I did notice one of the site that I now work with, was offering supports for autistic kids and used the word neurodivergent. And that word kept popping up, and, I started using that keyword to start looking up more things. Still not exactly knowing what that meant, but it really hasn't been that long since I've learned about the word neurodivergent.
So like a year ago at this point.
Yeah, like a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think I honestly heard the term until you started using it around me, or if I had it, was literally in the back of my mind. And I know even to this day, I still sometimes struggle confusing neurodiverse and neurodivergent. In fact, before we started recording this episode, I pulled some article up and was misusing them, and I kind of had to correct me. So that's why I think it would be really good to just define the term. So neurodiversity is the idea that it is normal and acceptable for people's brains to function in different ways, basically implying that not 100% of humans are going to have the same patterns of thinking and the same brain operation, basically.
Yeah.
So the two labels that are important to know under that umbrella are neurotypical and neurodivergent. So neurotypical people are people whose brain functions are considered quote unquote typical to the human population, and they most likely hit their developmental milestones pretty much along the same lines as their peers. So if you look at standard developmental milestones of things like speech or walking or being able to do certain motor tasks and such, there's going to be a standard curve for that, and most neurotypical people are going to fall into that. Neurodivergent people, on the other hand, their brains function differently, and this is in more than one way or just one way, and can encompass a huge umbrella of people. So just to name a few, because the list we could take a whole episode just discussing the list, but the most common ones are people on the autistic spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's even, dyspraxia, synesthesia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, etc. So now that you have a good understanding of that and have kind of the clinical lens there, we wanna jump into talking about how this impacts people, because again, we both identify on this spectrum. So I identify with ADHD.
And I identify I am autistic. Person first language.
Yes. That is something that I'm still working on too, like how to properly word things in a person first way.
So with neurodivergence, it's an identity. So similar with, it would almost be like me saying, I have lesbianism.
Right.
Or I am a lesbian. I am autistic. I have autism. So it's how some people, why they go into person first language is because if you identify with it, it's not separating this part of you and saying, this is a part that needs to be solved. Like, I'm a person with autism. Autism is a thing that needs to be fixed. Which, I mean, is a lot of things in terms of authenticity. And a lot of people who come to counseling will be like, I have anxiety and I need you to fix it. I have this behavior and I need you to fix it. I have this symptom to this. And that mindset can just cause that to become worse because you are shutting down an innate part of you, and instead of figuring out what you need around it, you're instead trying to snuff it out, and that's not how that works.
So simultaneously, like an avoidance of being that way and a desire to fix it.
Which is how masking comes in.
Right. So that would be a good topic for us to explore, is masking. So masking is the process of literally putting on a metaphorical mask to act in a quote-unquote more normal way or a more acceptable way in front of different people or in different situations. So does any specific scenario where you mask come to mind?
So masking, if we were to describe masking for people, a lot of neurotypicals would be like, well, I mask. Because personas compare, like, or different hats. People will say, like, I have my work hat versus my family hat versus my going out to a bar hat. And, like, it might feel similar to neurotypicals because you kind of shift your personality a little bit to fit the the social construct of
right, different parts of us.
Yeah, but for example, my way of speech had to be changed, and the whole interview process of like, make sure you look them in the eye, make sure you are not oversharing, make sure that you are walking a specific way, make sure that you are smiling more often. Like my affect, I just don't keep track of that much. And so to no detriment of my parents, because, you know, in the 90s it was, and still now, like trying to fit in with society and caring about your kid not being made fun of and being successful meant living up to social norms. So like, even if I provide stories regarding them correcting my stuff, I'm not doing it in a blamey way. It's more just like that was how it is, and caused me to mask even more severely and causes me now to have kind of negative spirals if I do have like a social faux pas or think that I messed up socially. So that was some of the stuff that was really focused on, was looking people in the eye, asking the right questions, creating scripts to help me know how to do conversations with people. So those were some of the ways that I recognized as masking once I started looking deeper into my autistic identity.
That makes sense.
Have you experienced or noticed any aspects of yourself that isn't necessarily a persona, but it's a thing that you realize that you learned for the purpose of fitting into society?
I wouldn't say fitting into society necessarily. So, you know, I'm self-diagnosed ADHD. I have had a therapist run an assessment with me and I scored very high, but it wasn't like a formal, because she was not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I mean,
same with my therapist. Like we did checked through the DSM list and it was basically like, yep.
But in terms of masking, I never really had to, because at least as a kid, because my behaviors, the way it manifested for me as a assigned female at birth person with ADHD, it normally goes unnoticed. For me, it showed up as extreme studiousness. I asked my mom about how things were when I was a kid, because I don't have much memory due to trauma. Mm-hmm. But she said that I would come home from school and get hyperfixated on an assignment, and then it would need to be perfect. And I would stay up like so late, like well beyond what was appropriate for my age range. And if she tried to disrupt me working on that assignment, I would become hysterical.
Yeah.
I don't have memory of this, but, you know, I totally believe it, because even now when I get hyperfixated on something, I feel guilty about it. Mm. And so now that's kind of where a desire to mask comes in, but I really am trying to be authentic in myself. Like, I was up working on a project the other day, and you came downstairs and were like, can we watch some Star Wars? And I was just like, no.
Yeah.
No, like, I'm brain dumping massive ideas right now, and like, I can't. Yeah. And I came to bed late.
Yep.
I would not have done that. So in prior relationships, that sort of behavior was met as inappropriate, as socially awkward, as, you know, all kinds of negative things. So my experience is mainly around masking in prior toxic relationships and trying to hide those behaviors of hyperfixation and like extreme interest in something, because it would be considered a distraction from the relationship or something, you know, something like that. So I don't really see myself mask much at all, other than maybe professionally. I really have to sometimes super focus when I'm with a client, because I'll want to be distracted, because my brain wants to go in other directions, but I can't professionally. So it's a larger energy drain to stay with it. And I often have to fidget. And if I don't have my fidget, then I start picking my fingers. And
Did you ever feel like you had to hide your fidgeting?
you know, again, I don't really remember
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that. And yeah, this is where neurodivergence and trauma,
Yay, comorbidity.
and it's actually very common for neurodivergent people to have experienced trauma because they were targeted for being different from neurotypicals.
Yeah, and also there's the trauma of being invalidated for your experiences as well. So it's like, instead of you needing more support, it's you being wrong or you being bad. A part of you that needs to completely change instead of figuring out scaffolding around what is actually a need that you are trying to voice, which also gets in the way of when we mask and when our needs are being explained as bad or wrong, we then don't know how to recognize our own needs. We don't know how to recognize them as needs. We don't know how to come up with solutions and accommodations around those needs. We don't know how to set boundaries, because setting boundaries means that you're just a burden to everyone else because you need this thing. And in terms of my neurodivergence, I really like making different analytical connections to things. And in terms of identities, like neurodivergence is an identity, queer is an identity, non-binary is an identity. So it's like one of those things, like, for example, like non-binary being an identity, like before non-binary people started advocating for their pronouns, people were like, you're a burden. Like, why do I have to learn your pronouns? Like, why are you changing your name on me? Why is this happening? Like, that's too much work for me. And then it became hard for, like, hearing people say that, like, made it hard for me to start advocating when someone doesn't, like, accidentally uses she, her pronouns. And I'm like, they, them, please. Like, and it's so hard but at the same time, it's like, I want to walk the walk when my clients are like, how do I advocate for that? So it's the same thing with advocating for needs. It's hard when especially when you're first realizing you are as an adult and you spent 20 years of your life thinking that, plus
right,
that what your way of doing things is just wrong. So fix that instead of uncover your need and figure out what you need to advocate for.
Right. Yeah, there's so much sadness in me around the fact that we already struggle as a society so much with boundaries. Like 95% of the work I do with people is probably around boundaries. And check out my PDF on my website, safriana.com, for 5 things you need to know about building boundaries. Because...
Nice plug.
Yeah, you know me. I like to plug things. But... when we're not taught it's okay to draw boundaries, you know, most of us grew up with parents that were just like, do the thing because I said so.
Or you're going to make grandma sad if you don't hug her.
Right. And we're going to get into a whole episode about that. But basically, this is the groundwork for our inability to say, wow, that noise is really, really loud. And it's really bothering me. Can you turn that down? Or can you stop making that noise? And instead we just sort of internalize it and make ourselves small and just deal with it. That's what most of us do. And that comes from not being taught that our needs are okay, basically.
Yeah. And there's also other accommodation. Like, I mean, of course, unfortunately, with capitalism, you have to actually be searching for this sort of stuff for it to pop up in your ad feeds. But like, there are more fidget stores out there. There's more earplug and the stores that filter sound. So like it takes the whole, like some of the more extreme high pitch frequencies or like super loud frequencies and bring them down to a more palatable level, but you can still understand what people are saying, which is really great for, you know, kids who are transitioning from Zoom school online school to back into person, because we're recording this during the lovely COVID-19 turned into 2021.
Turned into 2022.
It's 2022 now. Dang.
Yeah, COVID-19 turned into 21 to 2022.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yikes. But going back into schools and having to deal with the chaos of, you can't turn down the volume of your Zoom. You can't, the volume in your classroom is the volume in your classroom.
Right.
And so if you don't like those loud volumes, that's also another thing, is like, can we have those accommodations as well? And instead of, which, I mean, schools have like 504 plans and are working through some of that. But at the same time, it's like schools are also struggling hardcore with just teacher to child ratios
and so many problems. I was a educator in the public school system for 7 years, and
I was a long-term sub for a couple years.
It's just not
so bad.
good. Like I worked hand in hand with some very lovely special educators, and so many of them had the kids' best interests at heart, but the school system as a whole
is another like microcosm societal norm bullshit thing that like inflicts other types of traumas on kids in terms of like, boys can wear whatever they want, but if a girl wears a spaghetti strap,
heaven forbid. That is a whole tangent that I could get on about how I got my principal fired, but sexism.
Yay.
But at any rate,
that'll be for a different episode.
if we go there,
we might. We'll just have a venting episode where we're like
vent about all the things society does.
Episode 25, the soapbox episode,
where I just vent, and that's where Justin comes in and is like,
capitalism. He just says the word capitalism
and then leaves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's probably about all he'd be comfortable with. His voice on recording.
I mean, he doesn't. Well, that's the thing, is like he doesn't hear his voice. Like, we're currently not listening to our voices right now. I get to deal with that later.
And I'm just never going to listen to it again, or I'll have an anxious breakdown.
What? Why? You sound great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, pal.
Yeah.
Well,
pal.
this is actually social trauma for me, because due to being neurodivergent, not really knowing it, and having, by all accounts, I believe my ex was neurotypical. But I had an ex who would critique the way that I socialized, the way that I spoke, the way that I presented myself in front of people. And like, now a majority of my friends and people that I spend time with are also neurodivergent. And the feedback that I get from them is, no, Safriana, like, you're fun to hang out with, and I understand you, and you're not awkward, and this and that. But I was repeatedly told in a prior relationship that I was socially awkward, and the way that I socialized wasn't acceptable, and things like that. And I didn't understand why, because I wasn't getting that feedback anywhere else.
Right.
And even though I can acknowledge that that was an unhealthy relationship with abusive behaviors in it, that trauma around my neurodivergence remains. Like, I always am questioning how I'm coming across. Yeah.
I mean, I remember sometimes you'll question, like, if we go out, you're like, I don't feel like putting on, like, schmancy clothes, or, like, is this too bummed down to go to Walmart? And I'm like, It's Walmart, first of all.
Walmart culture is, in fact, the best place if you just want to...
People watch?
Well, not just people watch, like, just be yourself and know that no one else cares.
I mean, you might be included on, like, Walmartians.com, but I mean, that's one way to gain popularity.
I want to make that a life goal now.
Okay.
I'm going to try and land on that page.
Perfect.
I'm mostly facetious, but...
But, like, that's the thing is, like, you would be like, oh, no. Like, are you going to be embarrassed by me?
Yes.
And, like, that's a thing, like, you're in charge of your own shit. Like, that's the thing about, like, autonomy. Like, I chose to be your partner because I want you to be you, not... like, be what I want you to be. Like, I just, like, that concept of, like, transforming yourself to be what your partner wants. I understand the like, you know, I had some severe anxious attachment stuff that caused me to do that in previous relationships, and that probably at the beginning of our relationship. But the more secure that we've gotten and the more we've, like, processed that concept, the more it doesn't make sense to sacrifice your authentic identity for someone else.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't do that anymore pretty much at all.
Nope. I remember when you're like, I'm trashing that concept.
Done with that.
And I was like, yes.
But the thing is, I don't think very many of us do enter early relationships thinking that we can just be ourselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, again, going back to most of the work that I do with clients is boundary work. Part of that boundary work is the right for them to be themselves.
Yeah.
And show up authentically and speak their needs. And being okay with the fact that other people might not be okay with who you really are. They might not like you.
Oh, and no. I have to be liked by everyone.
Like, then they are losing out on the awesome person that you are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Heck. So the thing I wanted to make sure we talked about was this concept of self-diagnosis. And I brought it up in episode 0 a little bit about how there is a movement for self-diagnosis of neurodivergence because, oh my God, it is like impossible to access services to get an official diagnosis. And when you can access services, it's not covered by insurance. Like 90% of the time, the tests are hundreds of dollars, which really just means
thousands of dollars.
Yeah, if not thousands of dollars, that there's only certain members of the population that can really access that. Mm-hmm. A lot of the people speaking out I've seen about a formal diagnosis, like a formal diagnosis, not just I went to my primary care and my primary care went through the checklist and said, yes, you have ADHD, so you can take, Adderall or
whatever stimulant medication you need. Yeah.
Which that is definitely a way to potentially get screened if you really feel like you need medication. But if you want a super formal, super diagnostic thing, it's so expensive and hard to find. So if you feel like you fit the symptoms of something, why, other than for medication purposes, does it matter if you choose to start using that label? If you say, wow, I've seen all of these ADHD TikToks, I have read the DSM-5 criteria, I feel like I have no organization, I'm hyperfixated all the time, or I'm spacing out, or, with ASD, I struggle with social norms and I don't want to make eye contact with people regularly unless I'm like really, really close to them. And sometimes even then not. And you're going through and seeing all these other people's experiences, but again, you're not trying to get medication.
Right.
Why does it matter if you identify that way?
Well, going back to the whole, like, it's an identity, and identities for some reason, people love to gatekeep, as members of the LGBTQIA plus community. We definitely are, before you started dating me for a long time, for 14 plus years, you were dating cis men or in relationships with cis men, like serious relationships. And you consider yourself what? Bi? Pan? Bi?
So I originally used the word pan because of the biphobic, transphobic thing.
Oh, right.
Where originally people who were using the bi label were seen as people that were transphobic and saying that trans men and trans women were not men and women.
Versus
they totally are.
Bi can mean now like two or more genders,
but the attraction may be felt differently.
Yeah.
So
versus pan is like
gender
it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't matter what gender you are. I feel the same type of attraction with
which is definitely not the case for me. Oh my God. But anyway, whole other queer identity episode there.
Yes, but in terms of like people who are bi being told you are not bi because you are in a quote unquote straight relationship.
Right.
Like, that is different than, you know, allies in the LGBTQI community being like, the A stands for ally. No, like, no.
No, sorry,
but
bud.
it's like someone being like, the A stands for autism and ally. Like, no, different. So it's like, because you aren't exactly living the experience, you are supporting people. So same concept of like, you know, bi people being like, am I bi enough? Am I queer enough? And then non-binary people who look like their assigned gender, of how society defines them to look like their assigned gender. Like if a AFAB presents more femininely and is saying, I am non-binary, please use they, them, or I am non-binary, please use he, him. And people are like, no, nope, I will not allow that. It's a similar concept of like, this is an identity that I fully, wholeheartedly believe in myself based off of all of my experiences and based off of, you know, how the symptoms are true in how they are in with me. And that is why I wholeheartedly believe in the autistic identity. So I remember when I was first learning about it and being like, oh, I may be autistic.
Meanwhile, I was like, as someone who grew up with an autistic brother,
yeah,
I kind of was like,
right. Like I believe you were the first one that started bringing up the idea that I could potentially have autistic traits. And I was like, yeah, I can see that, but I don't know if I'm allowed to call myself autistic. Allowed. Oof.
Yep, there we go.
But I remember, like, even in my graduate school filled with clinical mental health counselors and professors who are clinical mental health professional, like, and I mentioned the concept of me exploring that identity, and I my mask in the professional graduate school world. I'm AFAB, so it's like it presents a little bit differently because I've spent so much time learning social norms that I come across as pretty neurotypical, and I would get looks of like, are you sure though? Like, I'm like, okay, cool. From someone who's looking at me from an outside perspective, seeing most of my mask and social stuff, they don't really have a right to tell me that they don't see it because, like, a lot of the struggles happen internally.
Right, and that's a whole other episode on invisible illness and identity.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just because you don't see personally the way a neurodivergent person's symptoms or behaviors show up for them personally does not mean that it does not exist. So most people would probably not guess that on a nightly basis, I routinely forget what I'm doing 5 or 6 times. And thank God that 2 of my partners, sometimes 3 of them, are around at the same time to remind me what I said I was going to do, like 3 minutes ago.
I get you, like, you know, we'll forget to drink water sometimes. And Safriana will ask me to get her water. And I will get her water, and I will place it next to her, and she will walk away and do something else for 25 more minutes. Come back and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so thirsty. And I was like, I got you water. And she said, the next time you need to place it in my hand.
Yes.
And that's a good example of clarification and what her needs are in that scenario. Like, would you feel like you could have done that in past relationships if they...
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah. And it's like, asking for those sort of accommodations doesn't make you a burden or anything. It's just that people need to understand that everyone has their own needs. And the more that we understand how to, like, act around each other... Well, not act, but, like, the more...
Advocate around each other.
Well, yeah. Like, the more we know about everyone's needs... the more natural it becomes. So like initially, like your partner Ariel doesn't like door slams and loud noises. And when we lived with them, like the front door would naturally like slam shut pretty loud if I went away, like I closed it and went away. And I remember you mentioning it being like, wow, you closed the door really loud. And I wasn't even like realizing this was what was happening because it didn't bother me. And initially I was like, oh, I have to start worrying about that now. Ugh. Like, but like, because it was, you know, for neurodivergent people, a lot of times changing routine can be hard. But at the same time, I wanted to respect this person's needs. And so I was like, okay, well, it's not necessarily causing, it's literally me being a little more mindful when I'm walking out the front door to shut it a little more quietly. It's not completely rerouting me somewhere. It's not complete, like, and even if it was, again, it's like the more you get used to that muscle of realizing the different needs that people have, the easier it becomes. It's just the initial learning it can be hard. Same thing with like when people change their pronouns or their name, like the initial learning it can be real hard and you'll mess up a bunch of times. But the more you try and the more you get used to it, the more like that muscle memory gets learned. So it's really not a big deal. Yeah.
And, you know, again, I think it's really important just to go back to the fact that if somebody asks you something simple like that, like please don't slam doors, or please be mindful of loud noises or flashing lights. The flashing lights thing, I wish we would just do away with blinking Christmas lights and stuff like that, because you don't know who might react to it.
Right.
But if somebody asks you for something like that, it's not a big deal. You don't have to dig into why. You don't have to make them explain themselves, you know, if it's a minor adjustment, like not slamming a door.
Right.
And a lot of people, unfortunately, will make a big stink and a big fuss about that. And if that is your experience, please know that that is a red flag and could indicate an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah. And it is okay. Like, for example, as someone who likes routine, it is okay to have feelings of irritation. Like, those feelings are still valid. It is not okay to take it out on the person providing the boundary. Like, you can acknowledge your own feelings to someone else later. You can seek support in your own personal counseling. You can journal about it. You can find a coping mechanism about it, like that sort of thing. But it's not, a lot of times in the counseling field, we find people being like, this feeling isn't right, or this feeling is not appropriate, or this feeling isn't blah, blah, blah. Especially in, like, there's so many different situations where people like, you know, I feel guilty for feeling this way, or I feel, you know, we criticize ourselves for having certain feelings. And if a feeling pops up because of a thing, it doesn't make you a bad person. Like, that's totally fine. It's how we recognize the emotion, validate it, and then, you know, make sure that we respect people's requests.
Right. And that, you know, relates to Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and generally trying to make things as accessible for everyone as possible. If we could just focus as a society on making all things as accessible for all kinds of people as possible, we would be in a much better place.
Yeah. Oh, there's this, so I went to a training that my supervisor, Laura, was leading, and I don't exactly remember if there's a site related to this, but if there is, I can link it in the description. But basically, the concept of neurodiversity is anti-racist. Because, like, for example, like the IQ test for white people, like
for white men,
like, there was actually, so I'm studying for the National Counselor exam right now, so I'm having to learn all of these lovely things. And there's literally this thing called the bitch test. And that was just the acronym. And it,
Why am I not surprised?
because the B stood for black, and it was basically a black IQ test using black vernacular. And they, I believe, had white children take it to prove that, like, you know, the reason why the black population was not doing as well on the IQ test is because it was made for white people and their experiences, versus the bitch test was made for black people and their experiences. So it's like, so when we talk about neurotypical, are we talking about neurotypical in, like, neurotypicalness is in the lens of white man.
Right.
So, you know.
Why does the patriarchy gotta have their grubby little fingers and everything?
Were you going to say something else than grubby little fingers?
I don't know.
Okay, you started to say and I was like, were you going to say something about a dick? Like,
no. But anyone that supports the patriarchy, you are in fact a dick, and I will say it. I'll say it proudly. If you're listening to this podcast and you support the patriarchy, I don't know what you're doing here.
Indeed. I mean, if you're someone who is supporting the patriarchy and are curious about things and wanting to learn more, yeah.
Then I support you, because people can change.
Right, because I thought I was cis and straight, and I went to a queer and ally support group to learn about the queers when I was in college, and lo and behold,
if I recall the story correctly, they like took one look at you and were like,
yeah,
we know something you don't yet.
Like, hi, my name is dead name here, and I am straight and cis woman, and I'm just curious about everything.
Which, important note, it's not appropriate to clock people as queer, or to clock people as neurodivergent. You know, going back to something you said earlier about me bringing up the fact that you could be autistic.
I mean, we lived together. You were curious about it. I wasn't clocking you as autistic and being like, I'm going to force this label on you. Yeah.
But, you know, I remember you being like, I don't get why I don't fit in socially, and why do I struggle? You know, you're making eye contact with people, and I just can't. And, you know, there was all this questioning in you.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't understand how, like, friendships work, and what makes it, like, I would legitimately go on, like, a dating site. I mean, I still do. Like, I have, like, a profile on a dating site and being like, I'm here just to make friends. And, like, the first couple of people that I became friends with, I'm like, okay, so I'm going to be real with you right now. I'm going to, like, I literally, like,
You would dump your life story.
I would be like, I'm going to be as authentic as possible with you. Oh my gosh. And so I did. And usually my first question would be like, what do you want in a friendship?
Right.
And they would be like, what the fuck do I do with this information? Like, this wasn't like, they were like, man, this is intense. Like, or they'd be like, wow, that's a really good question. In which case they would not answer it and run away.
Yeah.
But it's like me truly being like, I don't know what people want. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, you know, that was before I was like, what do I want? Like, what do I see in a friendship? What do I really want in a friendship? So then I can answer that question for people and being like, you know, for example, I'm like, I'm really stressed out in grad school right now. I can't really offer a lot of time for you, but I can offer it through Discord, and I can play games with you once a week. That can be fine, but that's it.
Right.
And I want, like, emotional support, and I would love for you to, like, you know, I can be a shoulder for you to cry on occasionally. Like, that's fine. But, like, I was still in the fit in versus belonging aspect when I was, like, searching for friends, because that's how people are when a lot of, like, that's the thing too with this, we'll talk about this in future episodes, but, like, you know, with parents being taught social norms according to society, they're like, my child is not connected, doesn't have a lot of friends, and I'm worried about them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, does your kid want friends? Has your kid come to you and been like, I'm lonely and I want friends and I don't know how to connect with them? Or are they twiddling along on their, like, Minecraft game and hyperfixating on their Lego sets and, enjoying discovering new things on their own and are fine. You know? So it's
Meet
like
people where they're at. What a novel concept.
No, that's weird. And we're all about weird here.
We are all about weird here.
Weird is not a bad label.
No, it's not. I think that what I said to a client the other day, I was like, fly your freak flag proudly. And they were like, I'm writing that down right now. They got their therapy notebook out and scribbled it down.
That's
and
adorable.
I was like, this is a proud moment.
Okay, so if you ever, there is a song from Shrek the Musical called Freak Flag. And it's...
I have not heard this song.
I, for some reason, like, related to it hardcore when we did it at my church, actually, that I work at. And it was like 4 years ago or something that we did it. And it was just super just corny and quirky and amazing. And yeah, it was all about, like, embracing your quirky weirdness. And...
I'm pretty quirky weird. You were a little offended when I looked around the room while we were watching Schitt's Creek, and I was like, we're all a little bit Roland.
Yeah, because Roland makes me cringe.
He is awkward, but so well-meaning, and, you know, that is sometimes how neurodivergence can show up.
I know, it's kind of like you see it happen from, like, the outside, and, like... kind of like the ignorance is bliss thing. Like, he's so blissfully, like, in his element. Mm-hmm. But, like, everyone's like, I'm uncomfortable. And he's like, it's fine. And he, like, does this stuff. And, you know, and of course people don't know how to properly state boundaries. Like, right. And also Roland sometimes needs a little help, like, actually following boundaries. But when he's being just kind of quirky and embarrassing, like, I feel that. Like, sometimes I'll be, like, outright silly. And what are you looking at?
I was reading the quote from Emily Dickinson on my tea tag.
Oh, speaking of ADHD and...
Bring me the sunset in a cup, Emily Dickinson.
Wow, that's gay.
I mean, Emily Dickinson was gay.
I know. The fact that people were like, they're just friends. Wow. Just gal pals being gal pals. Yeah, mine is one thorn of experience is worth a whole wilderness of warning by James Russell Lowell.
Well,
yeah, because I guess men are pessimistic and women are all about the, I don't know. Anyway, down with the patriarchy.
Yes, down with the patriarchy. Heck. Hecking it up.
Heck is our grounding word to bring us back
when we need to center. It's like a mantra word.
Yeah,
that just brings us back to our heck-filled core.
Indeed.
So I think we've actually talked about most of the things that I wanted to make sure that we covered in this episode. I'm trying to think of... Do you have any final words of wisdom about being a neurodivergent person and how, you know, you'd like to see other people treat neurodivergent people?
I mean, so this is just how I want people to be treated, period. Is like, why do I have to give you, like, why do I have to, what? This is the thing that I don't understand sometimes, where if I feel like I need to say, I'm going to advocate for this thing because I'm autistic, or someone would be like, I need to advocate for you to not slam doors because I have PTSD.
Like having to out oneself in order to be given a common courtesy.
Can't we have needs?
Yes.
That are outside of what considered quote unquote normal? Like, we can just have needs. Like, I can just ask for a thing or request that a structure of something is done a certain way to help me best succeed in a certain way. Like, that's sometimes the hardest. Like, I remember, like, witnessing someone kind of, like, initially express their annoyance with someone's behavior, and then I this was like way back when, and I was like, they're autistic, and then they immediately softened.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm going to now give them more patience because I know about their disability. Like, no.
Yeah.
Why do you like similar concept with the whole like if someone parks in a handicap parking space and they have like a handicap thing in their window or whatever and they walk to the store, people throw a fit because they're like, you can walk. It's like, you don't know what they have.
Right. You don't know what's going on inside their body.
Like, they might not be able to walk very far. Like, they might need to get a wheelchair once they get into the store. Like, there's so many things that people just have a hissy fit about in terms of like, I need you to be disabled in order to advocate for needs.
Right.
I need you to have an ADHD like legit diagnosis in order to purchase these stim toys. I need you to blah 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 blah. Like that's kind of like where this is more like, this isn't necessarily wisdom, this is just more like me venting about seeing how society treats people in general. But it's like yes, you can list your identity loud and proud of being autistic or being an ADHDer. That's awesome. Sweet. But I also don't want it, like, I don't want people to feel like they need to be a certain level of autistic or certain level of ADHD. Like, again, I don't like levels or functioning labels. Like, I like thinking like, I am autistic who needs these supports sort of thing. Like, if people need verbal supports, or if people need sensory supports, or if people need, different educational supports, occupational therapy supports, like that sort of thing, instead of saying high functioning, low functioning, that sort of thing. But yeah, but I can also just say, hi, this is dysregulating me a little bit. Would you mind doing it this way instead?
Yeah, I think that the bottom line of the wisdom that I have to offer is you don't need to justify your kindness to people. Mm-hmm. You don't need a reason to be kind to somebody. You don't need a reason to treat them with respect for their needs. Yeah. If you can be anything, be kind, right? Like, if we all just accepted the differences in people, and I know this is my eternal optimism, and we are a long, long way from this, unfortunately, but if we could just show up for people as they are authentically with our own authentic selves, right, we would be in a much happier place. But society, which is based on patriarchal concepts, does not allow people to be authentic unless their authenticity, which
fits the norms,
fits the norms and fits the quote unquote structure, and that just leads to all kinds of people masking, and it's just such a toxic culture.
I mean, which is what we see in like expectations in families. Like, if any of you've seen Encanto, like that's a beautiful representation of like people hiding aspects of themselves or not exploring their true identities based off of the expectations that family members place on them. Like, that's another topic that we could go down one day. But
an entire podcast of me crying about how much I resonate with Louisa.
Indeed. The other thing is, I loved what you said in terms of like, people need to have just be able to not need an excuse to be authentic to others, like or be kind to others, sorry. And the reason why I love that concept is, I think part of the reason why we need an excuse is because it was taught to us by this patriarchal societal construct of like, look at
power
this,
dynamics.
Like, look at this diversity poster of all of these kids of different races and abilities reading books, or like, or be kind to someone who like is not as like who needs more help than you or what, like, but like we'll show people that are like of course people need help that are like very visibly in need of help, but then if there are people who are just comparably around the same level as you also have needs that are different than yours, that doesn't make their needs less valid.
Right. Going back to the invisibility aspect, just because you cannot see somebody's disability or you cannot see someone's need for accommodation does not mean that you cannot accommodate them.
Right. And in the comparing aspect of like, you know, this is why a lot of people do the whole like, I can't like complain about my stuff because these people had it worse. You know, and it's like, no, your experience is still valid. You can have just as much stuff. Like you can feel terrible about this stuff that you're dealing with, even if you are more privileged than others. Like, that's fine. Just understand, like, you know, it's this whole like invalidating of our own experiences. So you can be valid.
Yeah. So on the note of being valid, as we run to the end of our time here, I just want to put out there that being neurodivergent is in no way a bad thing. In fact, all types of neurodiversity, all types, neurotypical and neurodivergent, come with their own strengths and come with their own potential weaknesses. And all of that is worth celebrating. We have different types of people and different types of brains for a reason. That is how we function and how we can function even better as a society if we're able to embrace that. And if any of our experiences resonate with you, or if you've read about different types of neurodivergence before and you resonate with it, you know, I encourage you to do more research. And a formal diagnosis can certainly bring you a deeper sense of peace and understanding about why you may respond to certain things the way that you do, but you don't have to have a formal diagnosis if you're not looking for medical services, you know, regarding taking a prescribed medication.
You can definitely like explore, like you don't need to, like initially I was like, I don't need fidgets. I've never used fidgets before.
And then you got a fidget.
I got a fidget and I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. So like you can absolutely like experiment with like what you might need for yourself. And like, that's totally cool. Like experiment with what you need and what your accommodations are. 'Cause like, that's awesome.
And that just reminded me, something that I learned recently-ish that I think everybody should know is that 100% of us do have what are called stims, but neurotypical people's stims often aren't as visible. And stims are everything from the desire to fidget or bounce the leg or
nodding to certain music,
that urge to dance when music comes on. We all have ways of processing distress in our body that comes out in a variety of ways. But when people think of stims, they often think of the flapping of the hands or the rocking. That is somewhat common. And
which I love seeing. Like there's a kid that that helps me with the church service, and he does such an amazing job on the computer. And sometimes like the contemporary worship team will be singing a certain song that he really likes, and he'll be kind of rocking and like doing little stims or whatever, and it'll just bring me such joy because I know that he doesn't feel the need to mask that. He can just be himself and show his pure joy in however his body feels like he needs to.
And it literally, most stims don't hurt anyone. Right?
Of course,
I guess loud noise ones and stuff like that could, but you know, those are unique situations.
And we can talk more in future episodes about like children's different sensory needs and how to redirect them in a safe way, but not necessarily extinguishing them, which is another concept that I will love to talk about, because it's one of those things where it's like, this behavior is bad and it's causing them to hurt themselves. And it's like, maybe they really need to throw themselves on the floor. Let's invest in like padding in a certain area of the house so you can have them throw themselves on the floor.
Indeed.
You know, those sort of things.
Yeah. So
sorry, I'm talking so fast.
You're like, the excitement is setting in.
I don't actually have to apologize for that, but I'm just letting you know that I'm talking when I get really amped up about a topic and passionate about a topic. I will literally just go so fast. Heck.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for the official episode 1.
Yep.
Hopefully this was informative in some way or interesting, and feel free to reach out to us. And I guess we'll see you in episode 2.
Yep. Sounds great.
Bye for now.
Heck.